Welcome to Wine Soundtrack International. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world. In 30 answers, discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Alison Levine, and today I'm with Eben Sadie of the Sadie Family Wines out of South Africa. Eben, welcome, and tell us a little bit about where you're located in South Africa and about your family winery.
So we are located just about an hour northeast of Cape Town in the Paardeberg Mountain in Swartland. It's a region that I think has come a long way in the last 20 years, and it's one of South Africa's biggest regions, not in planting but in circumference. And it's a very big canvas to work off, and we established our winery there in 1999. At that stage, it was pretty much dominated still by the post-apartheid big cooperative system. And it's been an amazing 20 years of transition in that area. And just to have been part of it's been a privilege.
How many hectares do you have?
So on paper, I own 17 hectares, but the vast majority of it is actually vineyards. That is also, I've got a lot of vineyards that is not owned by us, but we still farm them because our farming techniques and our interpretations of what agriculture is a little bit different from the conventional view.
And tell me a little bit about that.
We live in a world that's seemingly, I don't know, I just feel often that the moral fiber is kind of breaking down. And I grew up and studied agriculture, and if you actually take down the definition in the word of agriculture, the word simply means it's a cultural activity in the land. And today we only have agribusiness, so we only view the earth as a source of money and income, and our hearts have permeated away from the culture and the responsibility, and more into just agribusiness. And the problem with that is we've lost our lineage to the earth.
And so what are the various grape varieties that you have planted or that you're working with to produce wines?
It's a big ordeal because, again, in the commercial world, people will just want to drink Chardonnay and Cabernet, Merlot and Shiraz, simplify things, make it easy, simple. But, that's not what our place is about. The Swartland is the biggest region in circumference. Again, not the most planted, but if you look at that and its proximity to the ocean, being Mediterranean of nature, I'm currently working with about 24 varieties, and in a response to global warming and all of that, I've also planted subsequently 35 new varieties, which I've gone over the last 18 years and selected across the globe for very specific reasons, mostly drought resistance, heat resistance, sunburn resistance, aspects that I think will be proactive measures to have that research and R&D available in as soon as possible to have not only a reactive response to global warming, but a proactive response is something that's more sustainable in terms of how we can go forward and deal with the change of our climate, because it is real.
And what is your total case production?
We're very tiny. We produce at this stage 5,000 cases. If it's an extraordinary year, we'll do 6,000 cases. With a drought, we've been producing 4,000 cases. I don't want to make more wine. Like I say, for me, it's a cultural activity, so I'm not motivated or stimulated by money or elementary things. At the scale of 5,000 cases, I can still sit on the tractor. I can still work full days in the vineyard. I don't need to answer emails all the time. I don't need to be on social media. I can just, spend my days like a normal farmer would spend. And for me, this cultural activity is about farming. It's about spending time in nature and spending time with the soils. And you can't observe if you don't have the time for observation. And observation is an acquired skill and something that requires a lot of time being spent in a singular place to make the judgment of differences that you observe.
Of the wines that you produce, are they available outside of South Africa?
Yes, our biggest market is actually South Africa, which is extraordinary because it's not the norm, and especially at our price points, that's much higher than the norm. We've got a very loyal following. We sell 50% of our wine in South Africa, and arguably we can sell all our wine in South Africa, and it sells out very quick. But again, culture requires of us to share. And the sharing is, we export at the moment to about 25 countries. We've got a number of countries on our mailing list, but we simply don't have the wine, and it doesn't make sense to send 36 bottles to a country just to say, drop a name that you need to ship at least 480 bottles to a country to have some kind of a presence. So we export. We are here in the United States. The United States gets 8% of half of our production, so 4% of our total production.
So what is your first memory relevant to wine?
I came into wine from the agricultural side, from the farming side. I was sitting at a barbecue in Komiki. It's a surfing. I'm a surfer, so I went to surf for the weekend, and I sat. And this was in the height of these first new, very aromatic wines. And, you grow up drinking beer and whiskey and all kinds of bad beverages and drugs on the side. And, and I sat at this barbecue with a friend of mine and colleague, Mark Kent, and he opened for me a bottle of Cloudy Bay Sauvignon Blanc, 1992. It was in the height of, Brian Crozer in Australia and David O'Hannon at Cloudy Bay. They were setting the pace for the new way of vinifying white wine. And I've never tasted anything like it. Today, I haven't drunk a bottle of Cloudy Bay in 15, 18 years. And I actually walked in a supermarket in America and saw a bottle yesterday. And I said to the guys, we shouldn't become pompous. We should actually taste the bottle and see where the bottle is. Now, the question is, who changed the most over the last 20 years? Is it us or the Cloudy Bay? And but the wine made a big, I never tasted wine with like asparagus and green cut grass and gooseberries, and it was like a salad bowl and just so in my face. But for the young untrained palate, that is a huge encounter. And then from there, just got infatuated with wine, and I started just drinking global wines, and it led to me going and living in Europe. I lived in Germany, Austria, Spain, France. I worked at vintage in Oregon, California. Went a bit all over the world, but being deeply rooted in South Africa and being an African, I wanted to make the final difference in the settlement. My contribution to the world of agriculture, I wanted to make in South Africa, hence the fact that I went back in 1999, really started with my own thing. I was still I had a day job and my own job. By 2001, I was going solo. Yeah.
Do you remember the most memorable wine you've drunk since you've been drinking wine, and what the occasion was, or one of the most memorable?
It's very difficult. It's always a very loaded question because, I sacrificed almost everything I had at that stage to put myself in a position to be drinking the greatest wines of the world. So I was just like somebody would stalk their star or whatever. I was just stalking wines, actively, with no real tact to it either. And so I've drunk a lot of wines, and I've drunk wines not once or twice, but like magnitude bottlings from early 20s in Bordeaux, late 1800 bottlings from Madeira, old port wines before phylloxera, great Loire wines, so it's almost an impossible thing to say. And, if you got to pin it down to one wine, it means that you actually, for me, the best wine I drank is probably the best wine I drank in the last 24 hours, so it's for me a loaded and impossible question. My exposure has just been so much, and it forged my being in terms of a producer. And I drink maybe 12 bottles of my own wine in a year, if that is the answer. I'm fascinated by people and other people's soil and other people's philosophies and interpretations, and I'm just celebrating wine generally.
So if we were to come to your house, your cellar would be a diverse place with wines from around the world. Is there anything in particular at this point that's tasting really good in your cellar?
The cellar has changed a lot. I would say from 22 to 32, it was incredibly diverse. It had wine from Armenia, Georgia, Croatia, Greece, Western Europe, North America's New World, the whole shooting match. In recent years, I've been now in like a 10-year decade deadlock with Burgundy and Piedmont. So Burgundy, Piedmont, and the Loire and the Moselle is basically, that's the four pillars today. And I think they will remain the four pillars. But I'm at a weird stage now where I'm almost ready to go more diverse again, because I almost need to revisit, it's been almost 15, 18 years since I've tasted like extensively Greek wines and Croatian wines, so I need to revisit it because the world moves and the planet moves. And I've got now not enough, you'll never have enough bottles, but I mean, I've got enough Burgundy and Piedmont and German and Loire wines to last me a while. And that aspect of the cellar, I think, is going to become more maintenance of sorts, just keeping up. Whereas I think going into New World regions and other regions, it's going to be more about curating and starting afresh and finding wines from those regions that's not currently actively being represented in the cellar.
Do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
No, I think the perfect variety is the variety of difference. I think the problem with this commercial world is, we want to narrow it down to drinking Chardonnay and Cabernet. So if globalization can have its way, we'll only have Chardonnay and Cabernet. And that will be a shame. And I think the diversity of wine regions is what makes it so interesting. And if the Rubik's Cube was only one color, it would be a damn boring block. There's a reason why we have magnitude of colors, and that's for me the wine world. And the travesty is that the New World was because it was developed. South Africa is the oldest in the New World, and you can already see it's the most diverse of the New World. Then you have America, Australia being less diverse, and Chile and so forth. And it's all about where the pendulum is. So if you look at Europe's got 7,000 varieties being planted between Lisbon and Crete, which is really a small place. It's the size of Texas. Mm-hmm. And we have gone and we've got and planted New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, South America, North America, essentially with 7-8 grapes. And that's poverty. That's a lack of vision. So the New World seems so progressive and developing and all of that, but actually we're not. We're fossils. Because the commercial edge of what it is. If say South Africa could make one of the best Assyrticos in the world, people are not going to buy it because bloggers don't want to write about it, people don't want to broadcast about it, people don't want to write about it, people don't want to write reviews on it, books on it, because it's not going to sell. And unfortunately, because we kind of sold out in the New World because we tried taking the easy road here. The right road for the New World is to properly plant it with the diverse varieties that's supposed to be there. And you cannot say that the varieties don't belong in the New World, because we must remind ourselves that the grapes in Europe, where they are located today, was not also the original standing. It's always been about human expansion in the world. And this is just a modern, postmodern expansion. Cabernet, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Malbec and Petit Verdot didn't grow in the Bordeaux forever. To put it in perspective, we planted our secondary and third generation regions in South Africa 200 years before they planted the Medoc. So it's kind of unfinished work. Loaded question, loaded answer, but it's a tragedy. And part of what I'm doing in our company with all the new varieties, it's a deal win, because we're selecting varieties that's going to carry us through global warming, and we're also selecting these varieties to properly populate our soils. So it's a double win, I hope.
So based on some of the things you've been saying, I'm going to ask, where do you feel that wine critics and scores fit in to all of this?
They are means to a way. I think it's very easy to not pick writers or scores, and that's not my job, because I think everybody's entitled to their own opinion. I'm more worried about the sheep that's following, and that's probably the gist of society. We are lazy. We don't want to explore. Then we want to have other people make up our minds for us, and that's just damn lazy. So critics, scores, all of that, it's part of society. It's going to remain part of society. It's essential. When I was a 24-year-old boy, there's no ways I could have worked through Bordeaux without a book in my hand with scores to it, because I have to go into it with a strategy. It helped me to get through things. So if I today come and I sit here and I tell you that scores is all BS and nothing is working, and this is bad and that is bad, that is just not the point. I do think, however, that where there's advertising involved, where there's other strings attached and politics, I take the score sometimes into question. It would be the same for any sport or any opinion out there. It would be the same for politics on votes. It's just a mess, but it's not going to go away. I think everybody that writes have to realize that it's much easier to write in ink than it is for us to plant grapes and till the land and follow the ink on the paper, and that they have a huge responsibility, and their principal responsibility is to lead us as growers in the right direction and not to play us like a bunch of muppets. And there's people's lives and livelihoods is at stake here, so there's a responsibility. And unfortunately, a lot of the people I meet just got massive egos, and that gets in the way of proper writing, proper reading, and proper education. I like humble wine writers and broadcasters.
So when it comes down to drinking wine and all of the wines of the world that you've had the pleasure and privilege to drink, how do you approach it when it comes to pairing it with food? Do you try to just come what may, whatever you're in the mood for, or do you take a little more strategic approach?
Food pairings are really difficult. They're almost impossible. I think in your home it's different because you know your cellar. First of all, you've paid for it, you've lived with it and all of that. Then you go out, you buy the ingredients, and I think you have the best chance of a perfect food pairing in your home. When you go to a restaurant and the chef's got a big ego and the guy that made the wine's got a big ego, you can imagine it's not going to work. It just doesn't work. So food pairing's really difficult. It's not a real big issue for me. It's not a big priority for me. For me, the best is just open a lot of wines. Don't finish all of them that night. Try tomorrow night with other food on the table. If you are buying good wine, it wouldn't go off in a week. You've got a week. The white wines we produce, you can keep open for a month. They don't bruise because they're produced in a proper way. So open the bottles, but to open one bottle of wine and cook one dish and think it's going to work, I think that's a little bit over-optimistic.
Wine Soundtrack International, the voice of wine producers from around the world.
For someone who hasn't tasted your wine, what do you think that they're missing out on? What are you trying to convey through your wine?
I think of a sense of honesty. For me, it's not... I'm a totally different person on today than what I was when I was 24, 25. When you're 24, 25, between your testosterone and your ego being developed and all of that, the alter ego gets a bit of hold of you and you push your wines and you try and force things onto people and all of that. So, and your wines kind of take on that kind of demeanor. And if you look at what we do today, I would say it's a completely 180-degree different orientation. And for me, I can just say, if somebody takes our wine or buy a wine or drink our wine, at least, if it's nothing else or other, it's going to be an honest attempt. Honest attempt. We want to make the most honest bottle of wine on the planet.
You talk about agriculture and how it's a culture, and you spend a lot of time in the vineyard, and that's where your passion is. What kind of variation do you see from year to year, vintage to vintage? I mean, you also touched upon, climate change and global warming. Do you see a lot of variation from year to year? And, are there any signs that you look for that are going to kind of determine what a harvest is going to be?
Yeah, the last 3 years, obviously, completely dominates our minds now. And it's almost for me impossible to see anything before the last 3 years because the drought's been just so real. We don't irrigate our vineyards. We naturally dry farm all of our vineyards. So when rain stops, it's a problem, And but it's woken us up. There's nothing like an empty bank account to quickly make you reassess the way you spend money. So the farming today is completely different, and I think I'm a better farmer today. This drought's almost pushed me over that ledge that I couldn't get over in farming. It's forced me to take the extra steps. Things that might come very invaluable in future, and we've got very, very complicated soils, and our soils are of a nature that, being some of the oldest soils on the planet, they're very fragile to compaction, to destruction of soil texture, and all of that. And although minimum tilling and all of that's part of the new genre of what agriculture ought to be, it's a fine line. We got to farm really hard to increase the carbon levels in our soil, better soil management, the varieties we choose to plant, the cover crops. I have different implements to go in the vineyard in different times. After winter, the soils are wet. Compaction is a threat. So I start off with very light implements, going very slowly, but you've got very little vigor at that stage. You don't need to go. And as the soils dry out in the season, whereas before you would have just had one tractor. So massive things that I'm busy adding on to our agriculture to adapt to this ever-changing climate of ours.
Do you have any traditions that you do at the start of harvest or at the end of harvest?
The start of harvest for us is we start the new year by bottling all our vintages to empty the cellar, and we go straight into harvest. There's almost not a breath to be taken. I try and drink a really good bottle, something that's extraordinary, something that's truly extraordinary on the first day to put everybody in the mood. And we end the harvest with the same. And then throughout harvest, we try and, when the mood's really low, but we've got a small operation and we've got a lot of people, and harvest is not a tough thing for us because I don't make a lot of wine. I don't want to make a lot of wine. I want to have the time. You can't work 11 months of the year and then mess it up in 1 month. So it's all structured around that. Yeah.
So being so in touch with nature and with your vineyards, do you ever talk to your vines or have anything to say to it? Or do you we always hear about winemakers who talk to their vines or talk to their wines.
I talk to everything all the time. I don't stop. I'm not embarrassed by it because I do think, you got to voice things and you got to voice what's important to you. And I often work on my own, or, you wake up. It might be very early in the morning. You're spraying. Yeah, you find yourself, I love spending the hours alone on the tractor, and, there's no phones, there's no email. You get to review things. When you sit for 8 hours or 10 hours in a day in your tractor, you've pretty much seen with your left and your right eye every single vine on either side of the two tracks. So, and you have a very good recall of where you are and where your viticulture is. You see little herbs and little grass growing in the vineyards in different spots, and you start to see the soil differentials. You observe just so many more things. The best way to observe vineyards on your feet. A better way would be to crawl, but you won't cover too much. But I walk a lot in the evenings in the vineyards, and I talk to them all the time. I often tell them just to not give up because I'm not giving up. So it's more like hang in there.
Nice little pep talk.
Don't wussy out on me because I'm not going to sell out. So I just tell our vineyards often, if there's a sellout on the farm, it's on their account. It's not going to be on mine. I'm in for the long haul. I've made wine for 25 years. I've got 20 years left in me. I'm privileged that I've got 3 kids. My daughter's still very young at this stage. She just wants to be Taylor Swift. But so I'm going to leave her to get to her senses. But my 2 sons, both, the one's living in France at the moment. The other one lived in France last year. The one's studying oenology and the other one's coming back to study oenology. So I'll have 2 boys in 4 years' time that's qualified. Hopefully send them out into the world, get more qualified, get balanced opinion, and hopefully welcome them back into our firm to take it on beyond my own, little space that I had.
And really become a family wines.
Yeah, no, we are. I'm working with my brother and my sister. Family is great. I always say you don't get fired so easily, but you're not getting promoted that easily either. So it's just a balanced environment.
And when you're not working, how do you spend your free time?
I surf. And I surf all the time. Maybe I surf too much. That's why I make also very little wine. You need waves are a little bit like wine or the vineyards. There's no schedule. When certain things require certain actions, you must put everything that you planned aside. And it's the same when the swell arrives and the waves strike the right angle and the winds are perfect offshore and the tide is in sight and display. You got to get in that pickup and drive as fast as you can and get there before those conditions change, and hopefully strike into a couple of waves that be memorable. I love spending time in the ocean. Yeah.
So, what would you say is the best piece of advice you ever received?
I got so much advice in my life. At a very early stage, I identified a couple of mentors and people that I just revere, and you get a lot of advice. But for me, the biggest advice I can give anybody is just follow your dream. Don't bloody sell out. Because if you sell out, you're going to hate yourself. So it's not worth it. It's even better to just fail with that dream than to sell out, because you even if you're then very successful with something else, you're always going to have this little voice in the back of your mind. So take it on, and you need to want it enough. I didn't come from a family of money. I started with $9,000, so it's not a lot of money. Started in a garage with a couple of barrels and a ton or 2, 3 or 4 fruit, and that was about what I had. And but time is a wonderful thing, and well planned, well managed, you can do a hell of a lot in a relatively short space of time.
Well, I was going to ask you, although you may have just said it, what would you say is your proudest achievement in your work to date? But it sounds like starting your winery and building it to what it is today is a pretty lofty achievement.
I think that everybody that I work with still like me. That's for me a hell of an achievement, because I'm quite tough. It's a serious thing. We're going to do this thing right. But everybody, all my colleagues that work with me at the Sadie Family Wine, I've got an incredible team. It's different. Some days I'm jealous of the great painters of the world, because all you need is a pastel, your canvas, and it's all just you. Wine's not that thing. It is art. It's complete art, but it's an art that requires a lot of people's input. So you can't make a wine on your own. It's a team effort. And for me, my greatest achievement is basically having been able to put the team together that I did, and having the trust of everybody and the 100% commitment. And it gives me huge relief. I feel very secure. I don't fear a day in the year or in time, because I know I've got the right team. We will pull through anything.
That's great. That's wonderful. If there was one person, living or deceased, who you could share a bottle of your wine with, who might that be?
I would like to share a bottle with my dad, I think. My dad passed away when I was... how old was I? I was 28 years old. He started to see some of the things that I did, but he didn't see all of it. So I would love to sit with my dad and just drink a bottle and talk about it. Yeah. But, it is how it is. I was very privileged. I grew up in an amazing home with a very strong father. We grew up incredibly poor baseline, but my dad's the person with the highest moral fiber I ever met. So a true example for me how to live things and do things. He was incredibly proud of me, and I'm incredibly proud of my father. And I think, and I hope and pray that I've been that same father to my children, because it's pivotal in person's makeup and being. And I think for me, it's one of the big issues today in the world. This fathers just don't spend enough time, constructive time with their kids, and with all the nonsense. And I'm privileged to live in an environment where we just can say no. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Complete the sentence for me. A table without wine is like?
A desert without sunshine.
And speaking of a desert, if you were being sent off to a deserted island, what 3 wines would you take with you?
It will have to be very big bottles.
Yes.
Hardly carryable. I'll probably take a bottle of Riesling from Schatzhofberg, probably Egon Müller, a Spätlese Trocken, preferably 20 years, 25 years of age. I'll take a bottle of Pinot Noir from the Comparatively vineyard in Rhone. That will need to be a bigger bottle. And I'll probably take 1 bottle of our own wine to remember the good old days. Yeah.
And which wine might that be?
I would probably take it's a hard one. I would take a bottle of, island is it a warm island or a cold island?
Up to you.
If it's all islands are warm, well, that's at least how we view it. So I'll probably take a bottle of the Palladius. Yeah.
And last question before we go, and this is just to have a little bit of fun. Correlating wine, it's called Wine Soundtrack, wine and music. A lot of times wine makes us think of music, or we listen to music in the vineyard or in the cellar. So of those 3 wines that you take to your deserted island, what kind of music would it inspire in you? So that Riesling.
The Riesling, being quite steely, quite linear. Let me think. I listen to a lot of Afrikaans music, so it's probably going to make no sense. So I could compare it to something else, but my own language music makes more sense. So I'll probably drink that with a song of Johannes Kerkorrel, which is a great artist. Unfortunately, took his own life, but I'll probably any one of his classic tracks will probably cover that one.
And then for the Burgundy,
the Comparatively, it's really silky. It's really elegant. It's really pure. I would say, in terms of our music, that's a tough one. Because it's a mere perfect wine. The times that I've had it, so what's the perfect song? I would probably... There's so much music going through my head. When you're trying to grab one, but it's got to be the right one. We've got a crop parent too. It's a tough one with music because it's got to be, because it's still got grip to it. So it must leave you with a bit of a tear. I love music, but the problem is, when I drink wine, I only think in Afrikaans music. I don't think like I don't even think American or British or whatever. So it will have to be another Afrikaans singer, and I'll probably settle in the end. It'll probably be a song of Du Plessis, Koos Du Plessis. I mean, his music it kind of sets the line and the tension and the weight and the gravitas. It will have to be one of Koos Du Plessis' classics. Yeah. Okay. The last one is easy. I will use the international. I think the Palladius, it reminds me of people because it's a family wine and it's so close to home. I like John Denver's Annie's song. Mm-hmm. Just something that's so close to someone, and my wife's been incredibly endearing. Our life's been quite dysfunctional because I've lived all over, working non-stop all the hours. So I probably dedicate the wine to her, and and for me, that there's one song that encapsulates that. So I'll, just for the listeners' sake, compare it to wine, a song that most people know, and it's probably John Denver's song, Annie's song.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, Eben, thank you so much for joining us today. And before we go, if you can just remind our listeners, can they come and visit your winery, or where can they find you online?
I'm not online. I don't even have a TV, but you find me if you find me. And if you find me, I'll give you my time undividedly. That's the one thing that I can promise people. But yeah, that is kind of how I roll. We do visits, but it is by appointment. But I do close the cellar in January. From January till Easter, the cellar is closed for visits. Everybody's coming down to South Africa for weather, so they're in the summer, but it's when we got to get a lot of things done, and I don't want to see people when I've got a load of grapes sitting in the sun, and it's just not responsible to the visit and not responsible to the grapes either. So if you come outside harvest and you schedule it through our winery, our website is just thesadiefamily.com. We don't have a website, it's a landing page, but you can get, there's one email address on that. And if you mail that, you can schedule an appointment. But please try and schedule it more than 12 hours in advance because we are busy.
Well, fair enough. Well, we're going to try and track you down in South Africa. We will find you on your landing page. And in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us today.
No, thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack International. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.